Gemini, Sun, Moon, Rising 2021, and what glorious times are coming for you, Geminis. I know it was hard. For the past 2 years, almost 3, Saturn has been transiting your 8th house, which is considered a karmic house, or in Vedic astrology they call it house of liberation, because you pay off all your karma or experience very fated difficult events, usually psychologically especially, and that's how you liberate yourself, by paying off that karma. So I saw quite a few Gemini. Let's start with a recap for the past, especially 2020, when so many planets were in your 8th house, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto. But I would say almost 3 years Saturn has been in your 8th house. Let's recap what was the most important things. You are paying off karma, difficult lessons. I saw big, and this is also the house of big transformations. So I saw a lot of Geminis transform during those last 2 years. Work on their psychological issues. Work with a psychologist even. Self-analyze themselves. Dig deep into the past to understand their motivations, to understand their biggest fears, to understand the things that the thing would break them emotionally before. So what has been happening for 2 years? You've been 3 years almost. You've been toughened up emotionally. The highest meaning of the 8th house is emotional strength. But how do we get emotional strength? By going through hell. So you're gonna feel emotionally strong when when you faced your fears and demons and you survived. So you have survived, Gemini. You have passed the test. When Saturn transits one of the karmic houses, like the 8th, the 12th, the 4th, this is emotionally the most testing time, I would say. And a lot of you were working to overcome those emotional pains that might not be even only from this lifetime. Some traumas have happened in previous incarnations and we carry them very deep inside. And when Saturn transits there, often, as it has been, but that's ending, but we're recapping, as it has been, it's, how do I say, we basically, as I said, we face our biggest fears. And I can give you a few examples of Gemini rising people that I've been observing, from the highest to the most difficult manifestation. The most difficult is I have a good friend who lost her child to cancer when Saturn entered her 8th house, or a big trauma can happen. And she was saying, it's been so slow, it's been 2.5 years and I can't move on, because Saturn slows down the 8th house is trauma and slows it down so you can feel each piece of it. And but Jupiter has been helping in 2020 to heal some of the emotional trauma. And it's not only losing children. 8th house rules all sudden events in life, which is death, birth. So I saw a lot of Gemini. It's the 8th house is on the verge of between death and birth. So it rules conceptions and births of children, but it also rules death. So I've seen Geminis experience encounters with death or near-death experiences in the last couple of years, or really get interested to learn about hidden secrets, about the occult, about past lifetimes. This is the ultimate goal, that when planets transit your 8th house, so you become more turned to the mysteries of life. So you start investigating life after death, those taboo topics. You start researching them, those scary topics, so you don't feel the fear anymore. And sometimes people are pushed into that by losing someone they love. So they start looking for what's the reason? Is there life behind that? Or they go into the occult. A lot of Gemini that I met and that I've seen over the past 2-3 years, they got very deep into astrology, into occult, into tarot, into psychology, into self-analysis. They became Geminis basically had to become from their more bubbly, breezy, easygoing to much deeper. It took them to the underground. Those planets in the 8th house, especially Saturn. It took them from the positive topics that Gemini naturally gravitate to. It took them to much darker places. But you're coming out, just like Persephone, when she was taken to the underground, and the 8th house is known as the underground as well. It was taken by Hades, Pluto. It was abducted and raped, so she suffered trauma, but she became way more mature, deeper, profound, and she came into the surface. That's when spring comes, according to mythology, when Persephone emerges from the underground of Hades. So that's what's coming for you guys. Spring. The tunnel, the dark tunnel you've been passing through psychologically. Some might even compare it to the dark night of the soul when Saturn transits the 8th house, you know. The tunnel you've been passing through is the end. From 2021, you're emerging on the other side. You're emerging reborn. 8th house is transformation, death, and rebirth. You've been going through this death slowly of your ego, of your personality. You can't even recognize yourself. Geminis have become so much more profound in the past 2 years. It took them from the superficial level to deep level. And you see why. Because you have a huge mission awaiting you, Gemini. And it's not a one-year mission in 2021. It might span out for 20 years for many of you. Because Saturn and Jupiter are initiating a new cycle for Gemini and for everyone. But for Gemini, it's in the luckiest, most auspicious house or area of life. It's called the 9th house, the house of Dharma, of good karma, the house of God's divine blessings. Because you passed through the night dark of the soul for the past 2-3 years. Because you confronted your inner demons. You killed the Hydra. Or let's say you starved the Hydra, and you passed the trial by fire or whatever. You pass the trial, and you can be initiated to the higher state of consciousness, which is the 9th house. When you emerge from the tunnel, you go to this higher state of consciousness. We'll speak about that, but let me say a few more things that I saw happening to Gemini rising people, strong Gemini sun, for example, that I've seen on Moon. They've been dealing with traumas. They've been working on them. They've been doing a psychological transmutation within themselves. They've changed so much. They became profounder. They became deeper. They've become, as I said, let me give you a few other examples. A few other people. One of my best friends is Gemini rising. And Saturn, Jupiter, for the past 2 years, she's been trying to deal with the trauma that happened to her in a relationship previously, and it's been slow process, but she told me recently, I think I'm finally healed. It was a very slow process to do this emotional releasing, but it's finally happening. So these are the themes you've been working till now. You know, this 8th house, which are more difficult, about intimacy, about ability to trust others. There might have been some problems even with resources of your spouse or partner, business partners, because Saturn could have restricted. There some issues that were created, but they're all coming to an end. There might have been some issues with insurances, inheritances as well. When Saturn transits the 8th house, often a person transforms their career, because Saturn is duty, responsibility, and work. 8th house is the house of big transformations, and I've often seen when Saturn transits the 8th house from ascendant in particular, maybe less so from the sun sign or the moon sign, but when it transits the 8th from the ascendant, I've often seen when people change radically their career, and they usually stick with it for a long time after that. Like one of my best friends from lawyer became a pharmacist. She opened a pharmacy. Or another person that I know, I've seen other Geminis that transformed physically as well. Like I know someone who was not able to shift their weight for 10, 15 years. And suddenly with those planets in the 8th house, the big change that happens psychologically when Saturn transits the 8th house unlocked a big transformation there as well. And she was able to radically transform. But transformation is not easy. Transformation can feel like death and rebirth. And now you're ready to be reborn. And Saturn and Jupiter, guys, are both moving at the same time. From the end of 2019 and the whole 2020, from the end of 2020 and the whole 2021, they will be in the luckiest, most positive house in astrology known as the 9th house from Gemini. And it's starting a new 20-year cycle. This Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that happens in your 9th house is the first time Saturn and Jupiter will conjunct in Aquarius. since 1226. 800 years, guys. You've never experienced that. None of us alive here have. And 700 years or something like that. We've never experienced that for 700 years, the last time. So this is a new age for the whole of humanity, new world order, you'll see. And I have good news for you. You can watch the independent video that will be free on YouTube. It will be like 2 hours about this age. But every single person will have a different role to play in that new emerging role and that new emerging culture and epoch for humanity. Which will be ruled by the air signs, because Saturn and Jupiter for the next 200 years will be every 20 years joining together in air signs. And Saturn and Jupiter determine the cultural and the development of society, the history cycle, so to speak, the ruling classes, the ruling social and economic trends. So each person will have a role to play, but the air signs, and you're the air sign, you're Gemini, will have the biggest role. They'll be the most attuned for the age that is starting. You're feeling it already, and it's also the age of Aquarius is starting, is dawning for 2,000 years ahead, but especially the first 200 years from this year, 2021, till 14 something, 24 2400, or how is it called? So for 200 years, but especially the next 20 years, you will take the reins, and a lot of Gemini people will be called to play a role in society according to this 9th house where Saturn and Jupiter are meeting. And that role is the role of teachers in any form and shape. You will be the ones people gradually, almost like a mission, come to you to figure out who they are, the path in their life. You find a lot of Geminis will discover a very inspired mission, because the 9th house is the house of Dharma. And I'm saying already from 2021, you'll see that. The whole 2021 is the year of air signs. All air signs will be so powerfully stimulated in a positive, beneficial way, because all the important action in 2021 is happening in your trinal houses, in air signs, basically supportive of you, so you know how to flow with that energy. They're called Dharma houses in ancient astrology. This is where the North Node is, which shows the fastest development in Gemini, in air sign, Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius, and Mercury will go retrograde 3 times, always only in the air signs. So you're working on those Dharma houses, which are the self houses. You're gonna find out who you truly are. I'm telling you, you didn't know who you are till now. First, you had the trial in the past 2 years where you were taken into those darker regions psychologically, emotionally, to work out your difficult stuff, to vaporize them and remove the poisons from yourself, from your body, from your soul, from your emotions. And you're like, I can't anymore, I can't. But you're coming to the end of the tunnel, as I said, and it's the most divine. Those houses, the Dharma houses, are known as the houses of divine blessings. The houses I've even written here, the houses of personal virtues. You'll be developing your virtues, morality, righteousness, truth. You'd become like beacons of truth for the next 20 years, because Saturn and Jupiter meet in the house of truth. You'll be like a moral compass for others. And if someone is listening who is not Gemini, they might laugh out and say, Gemini, moral compass? Gemini have no moral compass. Everything goes there with their logic. Well, you'll see now, guys. You'll see how you're aligning with very strong morals and virtues, or very strong belief systems. Of course, they can be Geminis that turn this to dark, because you'll be given such strong faith and vision and purpose, because the 9th house is the house of purpose, of meaning, of goal. And I'm sure that the ones that are watching this video, you're on the light path. There are very few human beings that consciously choose a very dark path. And of course, they're usually not, they're kind of on the psychopathic scale. They usually reach the highest levels of authority. But you know that some Geminis might choose it for very dark things, but they'll have a very powerful purpose, and the very powerful purpose behind it to and conviction, almost like fanaticism, can develop in some Geminis. Fanaticism, bigotry to an extreme. But for the biggest percentage of Gemini, I'm sure the ones that are watching this video, you're on a path of self-exploration, you want to be better human beings. The ninth house will give you exactly that, striving towards those better qualities. Not only striving, but having the strength. Saturn is very strong in Jupiter, and the inspiration. Jupiter is inspiration to stick, to develop those virtues, but especially to develop wisdom, the ninth house. You'd honestly be considered the wise ones for the next 20 years. The seeds are being planted this year, from the end of 2020, the whole 2021. Something will happen. You'd start on a path in your life that will eventually, at some point over the next 20 years, put you in a role of moral leadership, or in a role of revealer of truth, the ninth house, in a role of some kind of humanitarian role as well, or the role of inspiration and teacher, guru, guide, advisor, wisdom bringer and dispenser to others. Of course, sometimes it can go into being high on your moral horse. That's what we have to be careful about. But this is the role you have to be playing. Some of you might be starting with those Saturn, Jupiter activation of the ninth house, a new direction of education and learning. It can start as something very simple. You might be like, I'm nobody. How can I play such a role? I work as, I sell bread. Who can I teach? Whatever. And suddenly 2021 comes, Saturn and Jupiter trigger your ninth house of higher knowledge, higher wisdom, new horizons. And you hear about a course in something you've never heard about, and you're like, something clicks in you, because the ninth house is the house of epiphanies, of divine inspirations from above, of Dharma means the path you're supposed to walk, that your soul will be most joyful. The path, and it's not necessarily your career, it's not necessarily your job. How is this path? You can do a job, but your path might be to be consoler of others. Your career might be an accountant, but you will align somehow. You will discover something will give you your higher self, call it whatever you want, God, higher self. This is the house of the ninth house, will align you to your meaning in life, to your purpose, will align you to what will make you wake up in the morning with a smile and ready to take on the day. I remember I discovered astrology when Jupiter was transiting my ninth house more than 12 years ago. It's not 12, it's 14 years or something like that. And I remember, longer, way longer. And I remember that it's when Saturn, and especially when it's Saturn and Jupiter brings the inspiration. Saturn makes you fulfill it. Saturn makes you work on it hard to make it happen. Saturn makes you be steadfast and persevere, because sometimes we can get an inspiration. If it was just Jupiter passing there through your ninth house, you can get all inspired and excited about a new horizon, go and explore a few different countries, a few different things, and then Jupiter goes away and you kind of deflate it again and go into your routine. But no, Saturn's gonna be there for almost 2-3 years for you guys. And Saturn and Jupiter together is a combination of manifesting this house in a long basically whatever you start, it will have a very long-term impact and very long-term influence in your life. Whatever you study this year, whatever new interests you develop, intellectually, spiritually, they are to stay. They will shape you morally, psychologically, and your role in society for many years ahead. So as I said, it can start very simple as you get interested in a new course, you want to pre-qualify. If you have such inkling, if you have such desires in 2021, please go for it. Even if you don't have a desire, such an opportunity will appear for many of you to learn something new, to add extra qualification for yourself, to expand your knowledge. There will be an opportunities for some of you to travel. You might laugh at me and you say, with COVID, well, ninth house is that. There will be an opportunity to travel even for work or to travel. Ninth house is all kind of trips and distant travel. So it can be virtually traveling like means through your mind, exploring new books, exploring new areas of life, seeing the bigger picture. This is the ninth house.